I have some concerns about my dad's girlfriend, Kathy. Ever since my mom passed away in 2019, my dad has been feeling lonely and ready to settle down with someone. Anyone, even Kathy. Despite my warnings, he doesn't listen to me. Lately, I've noticed some suspicious behavior from Kathy around the house, and it's really starting to disturb me. Let me start from the beginning. I have two siblings, my 10-year-old brother Jake and my 2-year-old brother Scotty. From the moment my dad introduced Kathy to us, I had a bad feeling about her. There was something unsettling about her wide and exaggerated smile. Gradually, my dad started bringing her around more often, but I never developed any affection for her. Initially, it was because her personality felt off. Then things began to happen. Kathy has been staying with us for quite some time now. A few weeks ago, while my dad was out, I caught her in his closet. That's where he keeps his safe, along with the combination and other valuable items. When she saw me at the doorway, she greeted me with an annoyingly creepy smile and casually asked, "Hey, what's up, sweetie?" I didn't say anything, just responded with nothing and walked away to my room. I informed my dad about the incident, but he didn't seem concerned. A few days later, while my dad was once again at work, I came back from school and noticed Kathy leaving my little brother Jake's room and closing the door behind her. I questioned her about it, asking what she was doing in his room. She replied with a smile, saying, "I was just opening the window. It's hot in the house." I didn't respond and went up to my room. When I heard her go downstairs, I sneaked into Jake's room to check if the window was actually open. To my surprise, both windows were shut. Something was definitely not right with this woman. And I knew it, and I still know it. I informed my dad once again, but he simply asked me to be patient and understand the situation, acknowledging that I didn't care for Kathy. Fast forward to 2 days ago, when my dad, Jake, and I were all out, leaving Kathy to babysit Scotty. I decided to come home unannounced, hoping to catch her doing something suspicious again. Quietly, I entered the house and made my way to my room. From downstairs, I started hearing Scotty crying, but it was a distressed cry, unlike any I had heard before. Then, I heard Kathy screaming at the top of her lungs, telling him to shut up. It was the first time I witnessed her losing her temper, and it felt like her true colors were coming out. I rushed downstairs to protect my brother and confronted Kathy, demanding that she leave him alone. She was startled to see me home and, for the first time, didn't give me her creepy smile. Instead, she stared at me blankly, went downstairs, and closed the door. I immediately called my dad and informed him about the incident. That night, he had a conversation with Kathy about it, but I'm not sure how it went. Judging by my uneasiness, I assume it didn't go well. Later that night, I woke up to a noise in my room. When I looked up, I saw someone quickly leaving and closing the door behind them. I got out of bed, opened my door, and noticed my dad's bedroom door closing as well. Fearfully, I approached my dad's room, opened the door, and found Kathy and my dad lying in bed. I woke my dad up furiously and told him that Kathy had just been in my room. However, she denied the whole thing, claiming she had been in bed the whole time. I don't know if my dad believed me or not, but he told me to go back to my room while he talked to Kathy. I followed his instructions and closed the door, but I couldn't shake off the fear. I'm still scared. I want Kathy out of our house and our lives because I believe she poses a danger. Why was she in my room? It's absolutely terrifying. I'm concerned for the well-being of my family, and I don't know what actions we can take. A few years ago, when I was 30 years old, I had an unsettling experience at my condo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My condo, which I still own, is located on the second floor of a decent building that I won't mention for privacy reasons. I usually visit during the colder months up north, enjoying the beach as I work remotely through my laptop and phone. Fort Lauderdale is generally a clean and safe city, and the area where my building is situated is no exception. On a winter evening in January, I found myself on the balcony of my condo, with my feet dangling over the railing as I worked on my laptop. Suddenly, I heard someone yelling from the ground below. They were shouting, "Yo," and "Hey you." At first, I assumed they were addressing someone else and ignored it. But then, they called out, "Hey, you up there?" My heart skipped a beat because it became clear they were talking to me. I wondered why. Setting my laptop aside, I leaned over the railing to see a man standing in the parking lot in front of a car, looking up at me. He confirmed that he was indeed calling out to me, so I asked him what was going on. He requested that I come down so he could show me something cool. Taking a closer look at him, I noticed he was wearing a backward hat and a tank top. I assumed he was just some mischievous kid trying to mess with me, so I decided to ignore him and sat back down. As I resumed my work, I heard him laugh and say, "I'm gonna come up there and skin you alive, you prick." Startled, I stood up again and stared at him. His unsettling smile sent chills down my spine. I realized he appeared older than I initially thought. Although I wanted to shout something back at him, I inexplicably chose not to engage. Instead, I grabbed my laptop, went inside, and shut the sliding door. I half expected him to continue yelling at me, but I didn't hear anything. Despite feeling uncomfortable, I felt safer being indoors. I brushed it off as an encounter with an occasional drug-addled lunatic roaming the Florida streets. However, the situation escalated when the silence of my room was shattered by pounding on my condo door, accompanied by a voice hurling obscenities and threats at me. It was the same guy. The banging was so intense that I genuinely feared he would break down the door. All I could do was yell that I was calling the police, but it didn't faze him. The banging turned into disturbing carving and stabbing noises. The whole ordeal lasted only a minute or two, but it felt like an eternity until he delivered one last angry bang, screamed another obscenity, and finally left. I confirmed this through the peephole. After the ordeal, I immediately called the police to report the incident and showed them the stab marks on my door, proving that he had indeed tried to break in. I prayed that nobody had been harmed that night. I highly doubted he knew me. He was probably just a heavily drugged and disturbed individual seeking to inflict harm on someone. Something unsettling just occurred, leaving me unsure of my emotions. I'm typically not a spiritual person, but I feel quite disturbed. I've been involved with a guy named Spencer on and off after meeting him through a coworker at a bar. We clicked instantly, and I eventually introduced him to my family. While my parents were indifferent towards him, my grandparents, particularly my grandma, didn't warm up to him. They claimed to sense something negative about him and believed he wasn't a good person. This perception wasn't formed after just one meeting. It came after multiple encounters where everyone had a chance to form an opinion. I started to see their point as Spencer and I engaged in frequent arguments, with him losing his temper easily, even though we remained in an unstable relationship. One night, things escalated to the point where I felt he might become physically aggressive, but he managed to restrain himself and calm down. That was when I decided I had enough and ended the relationship, or so I thought. My grandma was especially pleased with my decision and insisted I could find someone better, preferably an Italian boy from a respectable family, as she always did. Unfortunately, not long after our breakup, my grandma passed away suddenly from a heart attack. During my period of mourning, I hung a picture of her on my bedroom wall as a tribute. This was only a month ago, and I've been going through a rough time. Out of vulnerability, when Spencer reached out to me 2 weeks ago, I weakly responded and agreed to see him. Surprisingly, these past 2 weeks were relatively calm. We didn't argue once, and I began feeling secure around him. A few days ago, we decided to officially become boyfriend and girlfriend. However, that very night, I was jolted awake by a crashing sound in my room. In a state of panic, I quickly turned on the lamp and realized that the picture of my grandma was no longer on the wall. I got out of bed and discovered that the frame had fallen to the floor, resulting in a cracked picture. This incident occurred on the night I agreed to date Spencer. Holding the broken frame in my hand, my heart raced, and my body trembled uncontrollably. The next day, I mustered the courage to call Spencer and suggested that we take a break since my thoughts weren't clear. He responded with furious anger over the phone, confirming my grandma's intuition about him. Yet, I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling surrounding the falling and breaking of the picture frame. There was no draft in the room, and I couldn't explain what could have caused it. In some twisted way, I couldn't help but wonder if it was a sign from my grandma. It's terrifying to consider the implications of such an event. This is one of the inexplicable incidents I've encountered in my life. I was upstairs in my room, engrossed in writing a history paper. As far as I knew, I was alone at home. However, I soon discovered that I was mistaken when I heard my mother's voice calling my name from downstairs. I responded, but she didn't answer. Feeling slightly annoyed because I didn't want to be interrupted while concentrating on my paper, I reluctantly left my room and headed downstairs to see what she wanted. Upon reaching the ground floor, I searched for my mom, but she was nowhere in sight. I called out to her again, and she replied, her voice emanating from the basement. Curiously, the basement lights were off. I called out to her again, asking why she was down there in the dark, but she didn't respond. I switched on the lights and descended the stairs. As I approached the bottom step, my mom called my name once more. It became increasingly peculiar because each time she called me, her tone and inflection remained identical. I shouted, "Mom," again, and she repeated my name, but she was nowhere to be found in the basement. Then I noticed that the little crawl space closet door was open. I referred to it as such because it was an odd closet that required crawling to enter, but it occupied a significant portion of the basement. That was the only place left where my mom could be, so I called out to her one final time. There was no response. I inched closer to the closet door, lowering myself to my knees to peer inside. It was pitch black within, and a sense of unease started to creep over me. I asked, "Mom, are you playing a prank on me?" but received no answer, just the faint buzzing of the basement light. Feeling increasingly disturbed, I stood up abruptly and, for some reason, sprinted back upstairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I had no idea what I had just witnessed and heard, so I grabbed the house phone and dialed my mom's cell number. It rang several times before she answered, informing me that she was out grocery shopping. I shared my experience with her, but naturally, she thought I was joking with her. It took half an hour of pleading for her to finally believe me. When both she and my dad returned home, we ventured down to the basement together. The closet door was still open. My dad entered, but there was no one inside. To this day, that remains the most chilling and inexplicable encounter of my life. Throughout my life, I've encountered numerous night terrors and battled various sleep disorders. I've lost count of how many times I've endured the chilling phenomenon of sleep paralysis. It's truly disturbing. I've also woken up countless times to the sight of spiders and other enormous bugs in my bed, only for them to vanish as I regain consciousness. These hallucinations are always remarkably real and vivid. In my panic, I often find myself leaping out of bed, screaming and tossing pillows at these non-existent creatures. And don't even get me started on the relentless nightmares. There was one particularly stressful week during school when I was buried in an avalanche of homework from all my classes. Mentally and physically drained, I was exhausted beyond measure. With half of my assignments due the following day, which happened to be a Friday, I found myself burning the midnight oil, trying to complete everything. It must have been around 3 a.m. when I finally finished my tasks. I collapsed onto my bed and fell into a deep slumber faster than I could recall. That night, the bad dreams returned. It's hard to describe the surreal dream I had that night. I found myself trapped inside a linear building, desperately trying to escape. Each room I entered held an assortment of candies, as if it were a haunted Halloween attraction. Yet in the dream, I was being pursued by an elusive presence, taunting me with the laughter of a child that seemed to echo from all directions. What caused me to wake up abruptly was reaching what seemed to be the final door of the building. The laughter grew louder, penetrating my consciousness. Upon opening the door, I found myself back in my bed, unable to move. Sleep paralysis had gripped me once again. Then, from the middle of the room, laughter emerged. I strained my eyes to focus on the center, where 4 individuals stood. It was like a family unit, tall male and female figures, accompanied by a small boy and girl. They held hands, their faces twisted into impossibly wide grins. As the familiar sensation of tightness enveloped my chest, a common symptom of sleep paralysis, I felt as though they were growing larger or inching closer, almost as if they were floating towards me. When my body finally responded, I threw off the sheets, hurled my pillows into the room, and let out a scream. However, there was nothing but empty space where the 4 figures had been, and the chilling laughter had ceased. It was an unprecedented hallucination, even for someone who had experienced sleep paralysis on numerous occasions. The next day, I sought medical assistance and visited my doctor, who prescribed me new medication. Since then, I have continued to endure my fair share of night terrors, but none have come close to the intensity of that haunting episode.